And what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Historic Hot Laps. I'm your host, Alex Daniels. I do apologize, we're doing this one a little late in the week. So for those who look forward to this on a certain day, I do apologize. We're going to be a little behind the 8 ball this week. But first up, let's talk about some motorsports stuff, some news, things like that. We'll get into some race recaps, and as always, we'll finish it off with a history segment. But let's get into it right out of the gate. Big headline, Colton Herta is officially set to drive the number 29 entry for Andretti Global, aka TWG, in the 2026 running of the Indianapolis 500. Now on the surface, this might sound pretty straightforward. Herta, Andretti, Indy 500. It's a combination we've seen a million times before, but this specific entry and timing make it worth paying attention to. The number 29 car has often been used strategically by Andretti, whether that's for expanding their presence at Indy or putting together something a little more experimental alongside the core lineup. So putting Herta in that seat tells you this isn't just a fill-in or a one-off decision. There's definitely some intent behind it. And with Herta, you're talking about a driver who's already proven that he has the speed for Indianapolis. The question has never really been the raw pace. It's been about putting together a complete month from qualifying to strategy. You got to add race execution, all the pieces you need to actually win the Indy 500. This move also hints at Andretti stacking their chances because the Indy 500 isn't just about having one strong car. It's about having multiple bullets in the chamber for that event, increasing your odds across 500 miles of chaos, cautions, and split-second decisions. The early takeaway here for us, don't treat that number 29 as a background entry. With Herta behind the wheel, this is a car that could absolutely factor to the front of the field. And as we get closer to May of 2026, this is going to be one of those storylines worth tracking. Not just where he qualifies, but how the program develops through the practice and into race day. Keep in mind, as we're recording this, there has been some scheduling conflict issues come up in the news from Formula 2, which is where Herta is spending his full-time efforts right now. And that's a real issue because normally this is a Toronto weekend for Formula 1 and for F2 and all the other feeder series, right? If they do make that change and say reschedule somewhere else overseas, that becomes a huge problem for Herta in trying to put together an Indy 500 effort. We will keep tracking this. We'll see what comes of it. And yeah, we'll update as we go. All right, let's jump into some stock car stuff. Look, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but the suspension indefinitely of Daniel Dye from the NASCAR Truck Series or any other of the NASCAR sanctioned events after his online comments during the little card reveal thing he was doing with his friends and taking jabs at David Malukas while they were watching the IndyCar race. Listen, whenever you're the guy in any part of any organization, don't be surprised if you get on the internet and do some dumb stuff if it comes back to haunt you, because that's exactly what we're seeing here. And not only that, he's trying to make homophobic remarks about a guy who's at the top of the game in IndyCar, has a great ride, has had a great season, has shown nothing but the best in performance, and you're a mid to back marker driver in the Truck Series and you're going to take jabs? I don't know. Personal opinion on this one, it's real stupid for him to do what he did. And clearly we got the PR statement of, I will be better, I'm going to take sensitivity training, blah, blah, blah. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's just going to end the way it is. You'll probably never see him on anything but local short tracks from here on out for the rest of his career. And that's on him. I mean, seems like a kid who's got quite the chip on his shoulder. I don't know what that's all about. But he did some dumb stuff, and not only that, he did it more than once. It wasn't just one little comment that then became, a snowball effect type thing. There's minutes upon minutes of him being stupid online, saying dumb stuff and everything else. So anyway, that's all the time we're going to spend on that. But Daniel Dye's out of the NASCAR Truck Series, all of it, probably for good. If it changes, we'll see. But that's all we got to say about that. All right, moving over to Formula 1. There's a major leadership story that has been making some waves as well. Adrian Newey is stepping down from his role as team principal. Now that headline alone is enough to get people talking because Newey isn't just any figure in Formula 1. He's widely regarded as one of the most influential designers and technical minds the sport has ever seen. His involvement in any team shapes not just their performance but their philosophy. So when the news broke that he would be stepping back from a leadership position, it definitely immediately raised some questions. So the first thing is the timing. This comes at a point where teams are balancing current performance with the next wave of regulation changes. That makes interleadership shift more significant than times of stagnant performance, right? Because it can affect both short-term results and long-term direction of the team. From what we know so far, the decision doesn't look like it's a sudden exit. appears to be more of a strategic step back from the day-to-day management responsibilities, potentially allowing Newey to refocus on the technical side, the area where he's historically had the biggest impact on teams. That's an important distinction because when you hear stepping down, it's easy to assume a full departure, but in this case, the expectation is that Newey will still be involved, just in a different capacity. Now, within the team, move kind of shifts the internal dynamic. The team principal role isn't just about performance on track, it's about managing the personnel, handling pressure from the ownership, dealing with the media and making high-level calls that shape the organization. Removing a figure like Newey from that position means someone else now steps into that spotlight, and externally, rival teams will be watching this very closely. Any perceived change in structure at the top can create questions about stability, even if reliability is more controlled. Formula One is much about confidence and perception as it is about outright speed. So the key thing to watch from here now is how this transition is going to play out, right? Does it free Newey up to influence the car more directly? Does the team maintain the same level of cohesion? Does performance on track reflect any of the internal changes? Because with someone like Adrian Newey, even a shift in a role can have a ripple effect across the entire grid, to be honest. Alright, before we wrap up on the news stuff, we do have a somber note from the motorsports world. Longtime Grand Prix of Long Beach promoter Jim McMillan has passed away, marking the end of an era for one of the most important street races in North America. McMillan wasn't just involved in Long Beach, he was Long Beach in many ways. Obviously, I'm not saying there's not going to be Long Beach here, so please don't panic, but he spent decades helping build and sustain the event, serving as president and CEO of the Grand Prix Association of Long Beach. Under his leadership, the race grew from its early days into one of the crown jewels of the IndyCar Series calendar, my personally second favorite race of the year. And what made his impact so significant is how he approached the event. This wasn't just about putting cars on track. McMillan understood for a street race to work, it had to be more than racing. It had to be an experience, something that brought in fans, businesses, and the entire city. That's exactly what Long Beach became. A race weekend that blends motorsports and entertainment, drawing massive crowds year after year, and becoming one of the most recognizable events in American racing. Jim's involvement actually dates all the way back to the very beginning of the race in the 1970s. He was there as the event evolved from Formula 5000 to Formula One, and eventually into the long-standing role in IndyCar. That kind of continuity in any organization is very rare. He helped guide the race through its changes in series, economic challenges, and constant logical hurdles that come with running a temporary street circuit in a major city like Long Beach. And through it all, Long Beach didn't just survive, it definitely thrived. Within the paddock, he was widely respected, not just as a promoter, but as someone who understood the sport and the people in it. Drivers, teams, and officials all knew Long Beach was in steady hands with him behind the wheel. His passing leaves on a significant void for the race, and not just for the event itself, but for the broader motorsports community, because figures like Jim don't just organize races, they shape them, they protect them, and in many cases, they're the reason those events are still around decades later. So, as the next running of the Grand Prix of Long Beach approaches, there's no questions that his presence will be felt, and his legacy will live on every time those cars take the green flag on the streets of Long Beach. And yeah, we just have to say thanks. I mean, what else can you do beyond that? Right, let's talk about some races this last week. We had NASCAR Darlington, so let's just kick it off there. Truck Series Darlington Raceway. This is one that had everything you'd expect from Darlington. You had some tire wear, some race chaos at the end, and a finish that completely flipped in the final laps. The headline here, though, is Corey Heim, who pulled off a stunning last lap pass to win in dramatic fashion. Now, this wasn't a race he dominated from the front. In fact, it was strategy that put him in the position late. With just a few laps left in regulation, Heim came down pit road for scuffed tires that were slightly fresher than the leaders. At the time, it didn't look like the winning move. Honestly, he restarted deep in the field when overtime began, but then everything started to swing his way. A caution during the first overtime attempt stacked the field back up again, and suddenly Heim had another shot. On the final restart, he lined up in ninth, still a long way from the lead, but a key advantage with the tire grip. Up front, you had Ross Chastain, who had control of the race and looked as if he had it locked down. He led 35 laps and managed both overtime restarts, doing everything right up to that point. But on the final lap, Heim used those fresher tires to charge through the field. Going into turns 3 and 4, he made an aggressive move to the inside of Chastain and completed the pass to steal the win right at the line. Behind them, you had Christian Eckes, who came home third, followed by Caden Honeycutt in fourth after leading a race high of 59 laps. Connor Mozak rounded out the top 5. Honeycutt's night was worth talking about because he was a major storyline He won the pole, controlled large portions of the race, and looked like a real contender, but a tough final restart from the outside lane dropped him back to take him out of the fight to win it. We also had a late race heartbreak for Carson Hocevar. He made a bold move with about 20 laps to go to take the lead, but a flat tire with just a few laps remaining sent him into the wall and brought out the caution that ultimately set up for the overtime finish. Earlier in the race, there was plenty of attrition as well. A lap 121 crash involving Ty Majeski and others took out some strong contenders, and Ben Rhodes had an especially tough night, crashing out just 3 laps into the race after tire damage. So we talked about that top 5 at Darlington. You had Corey Heim, Ross Chastain, Christian Eckes, Caden Honeycutt, and Connor Mozak. Big picture, this race came down to timing, execution. Heim took a gamble on tires, caught the right brakes, and then delivered when it mattered most. In a place like Darlington, that's how you win. Not just speed, but putting yourself in a position where the race gets chaotic at the end. But that's the Truck Series at Darlington, so what more can you ask for? We talked about the Truck Series. Let's move over to the O'Reilly Series real quick and rewind what happened over there. This one came down to execution on pit road late, with Justin Allgaier capitalizing to take the win. Now, for most of the race, the story centered around Kyle Larson. Larson had a dominant car. He led the majority of the race, controlled the pace through most of it, and looked like the clear favorite as his laps wound down. On speed alone, this was his race to lose, but Darlington, and really NASCAR in general, doesn't just come down to speed, it comes down to execution. And the turning point came at pit road. Late in the race, during a critical green flag pit cycle, Larson's team had a slow stop. That one moment cost him valuable track position and opened the door for the rest of the field, and that's where Allgaier stepped in. He and his team executed cleanly, gained the advantage through the pit cycle, and suddenly found themselves in control heading into the final stretch. Mind you, this is also Larson's teammate for this race over there at JR Motorsports. But from there, Allgaier did exactly what you have to do at Darlington, and he managed the gap, took care of the tires, and kept the car clean over the closing laps. Larson, meanwhile, tried to recover from the pit stop issue, but at that point, track position was definitely everything. Even with a fast car, it just wasn't enough to get back to the lead. At the line, it was Allgaier picking up the win, a race that was decided not by outright pace, but by who executed when it mattered most. Larson had to settle for second after leading the majority of the event, while Carson Kvapil came home third after a strong, consistent run. Fourth went to Sam Mayer, and rounding out the top 5 was Chandler Smith. So yeah, I mean, honestly though, overall, great weekend for JR Motorsports once again, and this one really highlighted what Darlington was all about. You can have the fastest car all day long, like Larson did, but one mistake, especially on pit road, can completely change the outcome. Allgaier and his team stayed clean, executed when it counted, and took advantage of the opportunity, and that's how you win Darlington. Alright, let's get into the main event at Darlington. That's the NASCAR Cup Series and the Goodyear 400. Headline here, Tyler Reddick continues an incredible start to the 2026 season, picking up his 4th win in just 6 races. This wasn't just a simple win either. This was a strategy-driven, hard-fought race where timing and execution made all the difference. Early on, the race was controlled by Brad Keselowski, who was also the dominant car for much of the day. He led over 140 laps and looked like the guy to beat, especially through the middle stages where track position definitely mattered most. But Darlington is all about the long runs and tire management. That's where things started to shift. With under 50 laps to go, Reddick and his team made the key call to pit for fresh tires. That gave them the advantage he needed, and once again got back out on the track. He started cutting through the gap and got himself right up to Keselowski. The decisive moment came when Reddick chased him down and made a pass with fresher rubber, and from there, he really never looked back, even with issues during the race, including a battery problem and losing his cool suit. Reddick managed the situation perfectly and pulled away late. At the line, it was a commanding win, so your top 5 from the Goodyear 400 stand is this: Tyler Reddick, Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney in 3rd, Carson Hocevar in 4th, which, by the way, in the final restart, he was like 20th or something. He started the day in the back of the pack for a car repair deal. Just crazy day from Carson Hocevar. And then 5th, Austin Cindric. A couple of other storylines worth noting. This race only had a handful of cautions, but there were still key incidents involving drivers like Denny Hamlin and others that shuffled the field and forced teams to adjust strategy. Big picture, though, the race came down to one thing, and that's execution late. Keselowski had the speed, but Reddick had the strategy, the timing, the tire advantage when it mattered most. And right now, he's not just winning, he's setting the pace for the entire season. But before we move on from Darlington, let's take a step back and talk about the bigger picture from the weekend, because there's a lot of hype going on here. NASCAR rolled into Darlington Raceway with a lot of attention on the rules package. You had more horsepower, less downforce. On paper, that's exactly what all the fans are asking for, right? And to be fair, it did deliver in some ways. The cars did look harder to drive. You could see drivers fighting the wheel, especially on the corner exit. Mistakes definitely mattered. Tire wear was a factor all weekend, which is exactly what Darlington is supposed to highlight. But here's the thing, it didn't completely transform the racing. We still saw track position matter. We still saw how important clean air was, especially late in the runs. And while the cars were more on edge, it didn't suddenly turn every race into a side-by-side battle for the lead. And that's where the conversation gets interesting, because the expectation, maybe even more the hope, was that this package would be more of a silver bullet, that more horsepower and less downforce would automatically fix everything. But that's just not how it works. Racing is always a combination of factors. You've got the track, the tire, the car, the drivers, the strategy. You could tweak one piece of the puzzle, but it doesn't instantly rewrite the entire product. What this weekend really showed was that this package is a step, not a solution. It's close to what fans want. It puts more control back in the driver's hands, but it still has its limitations, right? Especially when it comes to passing in dirty air. The other thing to keep in mind is Darlington itself. The track doesn't always produce wild side-by-side finishes. It's a rhythm track. It's about managing tires, hitting your marks, and being there at the end. So in some ways, it might just not be the perfect place to judge a package that's supposed to improve racing across the board. So where does this leave us? Well, honestly, somewhere in the middle, because there were some positives from the weekend. The cars did look better. The drivers had to work harder. Strategy played a huge role, but there's still room for improvement, especially if the goal is more passing and more dynamic racing throughout the field. And that's really the takeaway here. This isn't the final answer, but it might be a step in the right direction. Now the question is what NASCAR does next. Do they keep refining this package? Do they pair it with changes to the tire? Do they try at any other types of tracks? Because if this weekend proved anything, it's that the potential is definitely there. It just hasn't been fully unlocked yet. Let's shift gears and talk about endurance racing for a minute. The 73rd running of the 12 Hours of Sebring at Sebring International Raceway, and this year's race delivered exactly what Sebring is known for. A little bit of chaos, definitely some attrition, and a finish that came down to surviving all 12 hours. The headline story, a huge result for Porsche Penske Motorsport, locking out the 1-2 finish at the top of the GTP class after a race that was anything but straightforward. The winning car, again, the number 7 Porsche 963, fought through multiple challenges across the race, including contact, strategy calls, and constant traffic that defines multi-class racing at Sebring. This wasn't dominant start-to-finish win. It was definitely a grind. Throughout the race, the GTP field stayed tightly packed. Cadillac Racing and Acura entries were right there in the fight, trading pace depending on the conditions and the pit cycles. As the race moved towards the final hours, things started to escalate a little bit. We saw late race cautions bunch the field back up, setting the stage for a sprint to the finish, something you don't always expect after 12 hours, but it's classic Sebring for those in the final moments. In those final moments, Porsche Penske executed perfectly. The number 7 held the lead under pressure while the sister car in the number 6 backed it up to secure a 1-2 finish, a massive statement result, one that did not come easy, especially considering the adversity both cars had faced earlier in the race. Now one of the big post-race storylines involves the number 10 of Wayne Taylor Racing. On track, they finished in a podium position, but after the race, the result did not stand. The car failed post-race inspection, and as a result, it was disqualified, losing what would have been a hard-fought podium finish. That reshuffled the final order and highlighted just how critical every detail is in endurance racing, not just over 12 hours, but after the checkered flag. Looking at the GTD Pro class, it was another big day for Porsche. Manthey Racing and AO Racing delivered a 1-2 finish in that class as well in the Porsches, continuing a dominant showing for the brand across multiple categories. That gives Porsche a sweep of major results at Sebring, both in the headline GTP class and GTD Pro, underlining just how strong their program was across the entire event. And really, that's the story of the race. Sebring isn't just about the fastest car for a single stint, it's about surviving traffic, managing the bumps, avoiding mistakes, and executing every single detail from pit stops to post-race inspections. Porsche Penske Motorsports did all that. They handled adversity, stayed in the fight, and delivered when it mattered the most, especially in those final chaotic hours. Your big takeaway from Sebring is really just endurance racing at its best. Strategy, resilience, and execution over 12 grueling hours. And that's 12 hours of Sebring. Let's move on from the pavement to the dirt. Recap the last week of the Interstate Batteries High Limit Racing Series from Central Arizona Raceway in Casa Grande. We kicked things off Thursday, March 19th with the opening of the Cactus Classic presented by Avanti Windows and Doors. And the headline here, Rico Abreu delivering his first win with Tony Stewart and Curb Racing. Thursday's feature was wild from the start. Early leader Brad Sweet set the pace, but then several top 5 runners, James McFadden, Ryan Brown and Ryan Timms, they all dropped out, opening the door for Rico. Tanner Thorson controlled laps 3 through 13, but a final restart on lap 14 gave Abreu the chance to grab the lead. Once he did, he didn't ever look back, crossing the line 2.6 seconds ahead for the win. His 26th career victory with the series and the fourth different winner in 4 races for this season. Thorson kept his hot streak alive with a second place finish, maintaining his perfect top 5 streak and taking the championship lead in the Rod Gross Motorsports number 88. Running at the podium was Jason Pursley in third, making his best career run so far with that Casey Kane Racing entry. Other top 10 finishers include Giovanni Salci, Joel Miles Jr., Kerry Madsen, Tanner Holmes, DJ Neto, Ryan Timms, and Tyler Courtney. Fast forward to Saturday, March 21st for the finale of the Cactus Classic, and it was another thriller. This time James McFadden claimed victory in the Tartland Racing number 21 car. The race began with McFadden taking the early lead from pole from Giovanni Celsi. He looked comfortable until a red flag on lap 11 for an overturned Jason Pursley ride reset the field. Celsi briefly took the lead on lap 12, but McFadden regained control on lap 13 and held it to the checkered flag. He finished just half a second ahead, securing his 4th career high-limit racing win and joining an elite list of drivers with the Cactus Classic win sticker this season, making him the 6th different winner in 6 races. Giovanni Celsi scored a season-best runner-up finish, extending the streak of top 10 results to 6 straight races. That Sweet returned to the podium with a strong 10th to 3rd climb, earning the Rod and Supply Hard Charger honors. Other top 5 finishers were Cy Lynch in 4th and Aaron Reitzel in 5th. Running the top 10 were Tyler Courtney, Logan Seavey, Tanner Thorson, Ryan Timms, and Rico Abreu. Super good weekend in racing for the High Limit Series. And actually, as I record this, they've already raced again this week. Sprint car guys are insane, right? They just never quit. Keeping at the dirt track, let's check in with the World of Outlaws from their stop at Creek County Speedway. The headline here is this: David Gravel continues his hot streak, picking up a 3rd straight win in what turned out to be a wild night of racing. The race had chaos written all over it from the start. I'm going to pause here for just a second because a lot of guys have bailed out of the World of Outlaws to go high limit racing, and this is no dig at David Gravel. He's the GOAT for sure, but how much competition does he have on that level, right? Like, yes, there is mid-pack conversations to be had, all that good stuff, but David Gravel is just up there doing things by himself at this point. But this race had chaos written all over it from the start. Early on, multiple contenders found trouble, and the race quickly became a test of survival rather than just speed. Track conditions kept changing, and drivers were forced to constantly adjust their lines as the feature went on. Gravel, though, stayed composed through it all. He put himself in a position early, avoided the trouble that caught others out. When the opportunities opened up, he capitalized on them. As the race developed, he worked his way to the lead and managed the restarts of traffic perfectly. And that's really where this race was won, and that's execution. A night where mistakes were everywhere, Gravel kept it clean, stayed aggressive when he needed to, and stayed in control of the race when it mattered most. By the time the checkered flag flew, it was Gravel standing in victory lane once again, his 3rd consecutive win, with a clear statement that he's one of the drivers to beat now. Behind him, the rest of the field had to fight through the same chaotic conditions, with several strong runs coming from drivers who managed to survive the attrition, keep their cars intact. Big picture, this race was a perfect example of what World of Outlaws does best, and that's unpredictable high-intensity racing where anything can happen, and right now David Gravel is making the most of it. 3 wins in a row, momentum fully on his side, a championship push that's starting to take shape pretty early. And to close out this week's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most underrated careers in stock car racing history. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you to those that are listening, those that have subscribed. Please always tell a friend, tell a race enthusiast, share the show with somebody else. If you're listening for the first time, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, whatever the case may be, and let's keep this momentum going. We'll keep this thing going. But before we close it out, let's talk about Harry Grant. Figured, coincidence is quite a thing because we had planned to talk about Harry Grant this week, not knowing he was going to Grand Marshal the Darlington race. Kind of awesome to see him and Kurt Busch there together, all running stuff out, both Hall of Famers now. So let's close it out. When people talk about NASCAR history, the conversation usually goes straight to the Cup Series champions, the Daytona 500 winners, the big names, but the sport was built on just that level. It was built on drivers like Harry Grant, guys who mastered their craft in the divisions and formed the backbone of NASCAR. Grant's story really starts on the short tracks. He grew up racing in the Southeast, cutting his teeth on local circuits where races were tight, competition was fierce, and mistakes were punished immediately. These weren't big budget operations. You had to understand your car, manage that equipment, and think about your way through the race. And that's exactly what Grant became known for, thinking his way through races. He wasn't the guy charging from the back every week. He wasn't overly aggressive. Instead, he focused on rhythm, tire conservation, and positioning himself for the long run. That mindset paid off in a big way when he stepped into NASCAR Late Model Sportsman Series, what we now recognize as the foundation as today's O'Reilly Series. By the early 1980s, this series was stacked with talent. It was a proving ground filled with drivers who knew short tracks inside and out, and in 1982 put together a season that still stands out. Driving for Ginny Donlavey, Grant won 10 races on his way to the championship, 10 wins in a single season, and not at one type of track. He was winning on bull rings, intermediate tracks, different surfaces, adapting every single week. But here's what made that season the most special, and that's consistency. It wasn't just the wins, it was the fact that he was always there. Even on days when he didn't have the fastest car, he found a way to finish real strong. That's the difference between a race winner and a champion. Then in 1985, he backed it up again, another championship, and by this point, it was clear Grant wasn't just having a moment, he was defining an era of the series. Between those championship runs, he also became part of a key turning point in NASCAR history. In 1982, the Late Model Sportsman Series transitioned into what became the Busch Series, and in that very first season, under the new identity, Grant won one of the opening races at Daytona. Think about that for a second. Daytona, a brand new era for the series, and a short track specialist goes out there and wins on one of the biggest stages in motorsports. Absolutely insane, right? That one alone tells you a lot about his versatility. He wasn't limited to just one type of racing. He could take everything he learned on short tracks, auto control, drafting awareness, race management, and he apply it at super speedways. Over the course of his career, in what became the Busch Series, Grant racked up multiple wins and consistently ran at the front. He finished second in the championship standings in 1983 and remained a title contender through much of that decade. And yet, he never fully transitioned into a full-time Cup Series career. He made starts at the top level, but that wasn't just where his legacy was built. And that's actually what makes part of his story so interesting, because success in motorsports isn't a one-size-fits-all. Not every driver needs a Cup championship to validate their career. Grant dominated where he raced. He helped define a series. He completed at a high level for years, and that's what a legacy is. Another thing that stands out is how he stayed competitive. Through the early and mid-1980s, as the sport evolved, better equipment, tougher competition, and much more national attention, Grant didn't fall off. He adapted. He kept winning. He kept showing up as a factor. If you look at drivers he competed against, that became more impressive, that this was not a weak field. This was a generation of drivers who go on to make names for themselves all over NASCAR Cup Series. Yet week after week, Grant held his own. There's also smaller stories that help paint the picture of who he was as a driver. He was known for taking care of his equipment, something that mattered even more back then. When teams didn't have endless resources. If you tore up a car, it wasn't just a bad finish. It could impact you for multiple races. And Grant understood that. He knew when to push and he knew when to back off. And more often than not, that patience paid off late in races when others had burned up their tires or their equipment. In the garage, he earned a lot of respect for that. He wasn't known for any kind of controversy. He wasn't constantly in the middle of conflicts. He was known as a racer's racer, someone who could compete hard but also compete fair, and someone who could work with other drivers and other drivers could trust on track. That kind of reputation doesn't show up on a stat sheet, but it definitely matters. So when you look at the numbers, with multiple championships, double-digit wins in a single season, victories at major tracks like Daytona, that tells one part of the story, but the full bigger picture is so much bigger than that. Harry Grant represents a certain kind of driver, the kind that builds a career through consistency, discipline, and understanding the craft of racing at such a deeper level. He's part of that bridge between NASCAR's grassroots past and its more modern structured era. A driver who proved that you could come up through the short tracks and not just compete but also dominate. And even today, when you look at the O'Reilly Series, the drivers trying to make their mark, there's a direct line back to guys like Harry Grant who helped establish what that level of sport could be. So yeah, maybe his name doesn't come up as often as it should, but when you really dig into the history, it becomes pretty clear Harry Grant wasn't just part of the story, he helped shape it. And that's where we're going to leave it for this week's history segment. I really appreciate you listening all the way through to this. Appreciate all the interactions. Don't forget we're on all the socials, so please interact, and we'll just keep this thing going. Other than that, we've got a big week of racing coming up, and we are doing this one a little late, so we're already going to have cars on track probably by the time this posts on all the platforms. Maybe it'll hit a few tonight. But regardless, appreciate it again. We'll see you next week. Don't forget that like and subscribe button. Thanks for tuning in.